A huge Hells Angels motorcycle refused to turn on, leaving two experienced mechanics puzzled for days. But then, a widow woman in a wheelchair walked slowly into the shop and simply watched the broken bike. The next thing they knew, she pointed to a single bolt and said a sentence that made the mechanics fall to their knees, completely shocked by the unbelievable mystery she had just unearthed. The skeletal remains of the decommissioned maritime shipyard breathed a cold, metallic sorrow, a monument to forgotten industry. Within its vast, cavernous embrace, a cathedral of rust and steel, the local brotherhood, the Iron Reapers, found their sanctuary. But even this bastion of rough-hewn pride, usually echoing with the vibrant clang of metal and the deep thrum of engines, was now cloaked in a suffocating silence. A crisis, insidious and unrelenting, gnawed at the club's very core, threatening to unravel not just their formidable reputation, but the intricate tapestry of their shared identity. The heart of their dilemma pulsed around a relic, an almost sacred artifact, a Harley-Davidson WLA from 1943. This machine, more than mere metal and rubber, was a living testament to Finnegan, the club's enigmatic founder, a tangible link to an era of unyielding spirit. Yet for 3 grueling months this legend lay dormant, a silent sentinel, its engine refusing to yield to any command. The 23 most celebrated vintage vehicle restoration specialists. Along the entire coast, men whose reputations preceded them like thunder had all been vanquished by its complexities. Their failure was not merely mechanical, it was a profound, almost mystical defeat, a cancerous growth on the very soul of the club. Each failed attempt, each baffled expert retreating with a shrug of defeat, only deepened the chasm of despair that threatened to swallow the Iron Reapers whole. The air hung thick with a tension that was almost palpable, a slow-burning fuse threatening to detonate the carefully constructed piece of their existence. The bike's inert form, draped in chrome, and the residual grime of countless failed repairs, was a constant, mocking reminder of their vulnerability. The morning of her arrival was painted in hues of salted mist, carrying the lingering scent of ancient oil and corroded metal. Iris Thorne, a name whispered with a mixture of disbelief and weary skepticism among the burly men, cut a figure starkly at odds with the shipyard's raw, uncompromising aesthetic. A woman of 70 seasons, her posture was held with an almost defiant rigidity, supported by an elegant orthopedic cane that clicked softly against the concrete. She carried a weight far heavier than her years or her physical limitation. Her eyes, a startlingly clear and distant blue, seemed to absorb the brutal skepticism and thinly veiled disdain radiating from the leather-clad giants, yet registered none of it. A palpable silence, heavy with scorn, enveloped her as she approached the object of their collective devotion. The machine, now cloaked in the morning colors of chrome and road tar, seemed to almost recoil from her presence. Iris moved with a deliberate slowness, an economy of motion that bordered on the insolent. She waved away the tools offered, their polished steel glinting uselessly in the dim light. Her interaction with the intricate structure of the knucklehead was less a repair and more a whispered communion with a sleeping titan. The touch of her fingers, long and surprisingly firm, traced paths across ducts and valves with an almost surgical precision, as if she were not merely touching components of metal, but rather mapping buried memories, deciphering a forgotten language. There was a peculiar, almost detached grace in her movements, a silent ballet of focused intent. The rough, calloused hands of the mechanics, accustomed to brute force and the stubborn resistance of machinery, watched, mesmerized by the delicate intensity of her work. Each subtle movement, each calculated sweep of her hand, conveyed an intimacy with the machine that none of them, despite their years of expertise, could replicate. It was as if the motorcycle itself recognized an old friend, a master returning after a long absence. Her face, etched with lines that spoke of both wisdom and unspoken sorrow, remained impassive, betraying no hint of the meticulous calculations unfolding within her mind. She inhaled the scent of metal and oil, not with distaste, but with a profound, almost nostalgic familiarity. The air thickened with anticipation, a silent prayer forming on the lips of men who rarely prayed. In less than 5 minutes, with a barely perceptible adjustment to the carburetor, a gesture so minute it almost went unnoticed, the machine stirred. A cough, then a hesitant growl, and then the full-throated roar that ripped through the shipyard was more than the sound of an engine reigniting. It was the echoing sound of a ghost, a legend, tearing its way back from the clutches of oblivion. The very foundations of the old shipyard seemed to tremble, awakening from its long slumber as the resurrected heartbeat of the Harley filled the vast space. The Iron Reapers, hardened men of the road, stood frozen, a collective breath held, their faces slowly morphing from disbelief to a dawning, almost reverent awe. The triumph, however, was fleeting, a bitter pill masked by the sweet taste of success. For Iris, the moment of victory arrived steeped in a cold, sudden terror. As the engine sputtered to life, then settled into a rhythmic, thunderous purr, her face blanched, a ghastly pallor spreading across her features. Her clear blue eyes, which had been so distant and controlled, now widened with a chilling recognition. The panic that seized her was not the joyful relief of a job well done, but the visceral shock of a secret violently disinterred, exposed to the harsh light of day. The act of repairing, so instinctive, so flawlessly executed, had inadvertently illuminated a part of the motorcycle, a secret she had meticulously buried under decades of carefully constructed silence and an elaborate false identity. Her touch, honed by a life she had long ago shed, had betrayed her current existence, tearing open a wound she had fiercely pretended to have cauterized over half a century. Her body, usually so rigidly composed, seemed to sag, her grip on the cane tightening until her knuckles were white, her breath catching in her throat as if suddenly deprived of air. The familiar roar, a symphony to the Iron Reapers, was a death knell to Iris, a clarion call announcing the undoing of her carefully crafted peace. She felt the eyes of the men upon her, no longer dismissive but curious, questioning, dissecting. The delicate dance of her fingers on the carburetor had not merely fixed a machine, it had unveiled a truth far more dangerous than any mechanical failure. The silence that followed the engine's stable thrum was now pregnant with unspoken questions, with a heavy sense of impending doom that only Iris could truly perceive. The metallic tang of oil in the air suddenly tasted of fear, of a past refusing to remain buried. Every rumble of the engine was a ticking clock, counting down the precious seconds of her anonymity, threatening to plunge her into the very abyss from which she had so desperately sought refuge. The shipyard, once a symbol of peace, now transformed into a stage for the unraveling of a carefully guarded life. One of the restoration specialists, a man named Ellis, whose hands were permanently stained with grease and whose eyes held the keen sharpness of a seasoned hunter, was the first to perceive the subtle anomaly. He had watched Iris with a professional's intensity, a mixture of envy and respect blooming in his chest. But as the engine settled, his gaze, trained by years of dissecting vintage machinery, lingered on a specific section of the carburetor, a point where Iris's fingers had momentarily rested. He noticed a nuanced difference in the material, a minute disparity in the texture, an almost imperceptible irregularity in an otherwise perfect machine. His brow furrowed. There was an uncanny fit, a precision in the joinery that simply did not align with the known American design of that era. Curiosity, a powerful current, pulled him closer. Under a layer of meticulously applied grime, a camouflage designed to mimic age and neglect, he uncovered hidden modifications, small intricate components of covert propulsion hardware. These parts, meticulously integrated, spoke not of the straightforward engineering of a 1940s Harley, but hinted at a far more advanced, almost alien technology, reminiscent of a rival global power at the zenith of its Cold War prowess. His discovery sent a jolt through the quiet admiration that had settled over the Iron Reapers. The subtle glint of unfamiliar metal, the precise, almost futuristic lines of the components screamed of an origin far removed from Milwaukee. Ellis, his voice hushed with a dawning realization, pointed out the incongruity to the other mechanics, their shared awe now tainted by a growing unease. The questioning was direct, the pressure emanating from the formidable brotherhood suddenly crushing, suffocating. Iris, cornered by the very roar she had so skillfully reawakened, was now forced to confront the unthinkable, to confess a truth she had spent a lifetime burying. The modifications, those precise, almost microscopic additions, she admitted, had been her own work, installed more than 5 decades ago in the mid-1960s. That motorcycle, a symbol of freedom to the Iron Reapers, had then served a far darker purpose, a Trojan horse discreetly transporting encrypted digital files across invisible borders and treacherous front lines, a silent courier in a world consumed by shadows and suspicion. The admission hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, shattering the carefully constructed facade of Iris Thorne, the quiet elderly widow. Iris Thorne, the seemingly unassuming elderly widow, was in truth a mirage, an exquisitely crafted illusion. She was, in a former life, a high-ranking aerospace engineer, a pivotal mind in the chilling development of strategic armaments. Her hands, now frail and marked by age, had once guided projects of immense destructive power. Her current existence was a meticulously woven tapestry of grief spun over the grave of her former identity. She had orchestrated her own demise, a shadow fleeing the blinding light of a project she had come to deem an abomination, the clandestine Black Lotus Initiative. This project, born from the depths of Cold War paranoia, sought to develop devices capable of rendering entire nations technologically deaf and blind, effectively nullifying their defense capabilities. Her life since then had been a penance, a perpetual mourning for the life she had once led, the path she had chosen, and the irreversible consequences of her genius. The very sound of the engine, the unmistakable resonance of her master touch, had traveled through channels Iris had hoped were forever silenced, forever dormant. The repair, an act of almost sacred restoration for the Iron Reapers, acted instead as a beacon, a blinding flare in the night, drawing the unwanted attention of Silas Sterling. Silas, her former colleague on the Black Lotus project, a brilliant and ruthless doctor of applied physics, whose cruelty and ambition were mirrored only by his formidable intellect, had always been a predator, his senses honed to track his prey with chilling precision. He arrived with a dark caravan of utility vehicles, their engines purring menacingly, flanked by men armed with a military precision that spoke volumes of their training and intent. Their objective was not personal vendetta, but the cold, calculated recovery of the hidden technology, the return of the AI prototype and its encapsulated knowledge to the control of the shadowy forces he represented. The old knucklehead, now gleaming in the shipyard's harsh light, was far more than a restored motorcycle. It was a sophisticated weapon system prototype, its chassis secretly reinforced with a military-grade titanium alloy, cleverly camouflaging a dangerous system, the MUT, electrokinetic charge device. This machine, seemingly innocuous, was in fact a mobile strategic platform, small enough to be easily overlooked, yet powerful enough to paralyze an entire metropolis with a single devastating pulse. The Cold War, a conflict of whispers and shadows, now erupted with shocking brutality into the predictable lives of Iris's family. Eleanor Thorne, her daughter, a quiet and unassuming history professor, and Leo Thorne, her grandson, a bright young architecture student, found their matriarch and the serene predictability of their world violently shattered. They were Ian's Naird, not by choice, but by the toxic inheritance of a secret that pulsed with the Cold War's lingering breath. The pursuit was not merely for the machine, but for the knowledge it encapsulated, sought by powerful, shadowy international forces operating beyond the visible reach of any government, any jurisdiction. The weight of this sudden, violent unveiling pressed down on Iris, a physical burden far heavier than her cane. Her quiet life, a carefully constructed sanctuary of anonymity and mundane routines, had been shattered. The familiar scent of salty air and rust, once a comfort, now held the sharp, acrid sting of imminent danger. She watched Eleanor and Leo, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear, and a wave of profound guilt washed over her. She had built this life for them, a shield against the horrors of her past, and now, with a single, precise turn of a wrench, that shield had crumbled. The Iron Reapers, once skeptical onlookers, were now drawn into the vortex of her exposed identity. Their initial awe at her mechanical prowess had curdled into a tense curiosity, a dawning understanding that the old woman was far more than she seemed. Their clubhouse, once an impenetrable fortress of brotherhood, felt suddenly vulnerable, its cold steel walls unable to keep out the ghosts of a bygone era. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the ominous hum of a world far removed from their biker code. Iris felt the scrutiny, not just from Silas Sterling's advancing shadows, but from the men who had just witnessed her miracle. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her carefully maintained facade had cracked beyond repair. The silence in the shipyard, after the roaring engine had settled into a rhythmic thrum, was no longer merely a lack of sound. It was a profound vacuum sucking away her peace, drawing her back into the treacherous currents of a life she had desperately tried to escape. Her mind, despite the encroaching panic, began to work with the cold, calculating efficiency of the engineer she once was. Every line on Silas Sterling's face, every subtle shift in his posture, was a data point. His convoy, the precise armed men, spoke volumes of the resources he commanded, resources that dwarfed anything the Iron Reapers could muster. Iris understood that this was not a simple confrontation, but a meticulously planned extraction, an operation decades in the making. The motorcycle, the very symbol of their current predicament, became a focal point for her strategic thinking. She knew its every secret, every modification, because she had placed them there. The electrokinetic charge device, a marvel of her own dark genius, was both her curse and her potential salvation. It was a tool of immense power, capable of crippling technology, but its activation was a delicate, dangerous dance. She had designed it for disruption, for creating chaos where order reigned, for an escape that left no electronic trace. Now that escape was no longer theoretical. It was an imperative, a desperate gamble for her freedom, and more importantly, for the safety of Eleanor and Leo. The weight of the device's potential rested heavily on her, a burden of both creation and consequence. The Iron Reapers, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden unspoken threat, began to move with an uncharacteristic quietude. Finnegan, the club's patriarch, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, stepped forward. His eyes, usually clouded with a stoic indifference, now held a glint of protective defiance. He had seen too much, fought too many battles, to abandon one of his own, even if that own was a mysterious old woman who had just brought his founder's bike back from the dead. The subtle shift in the men's collective energy, from skepticism to a cautious solidarity, was not lost on Iris. She recognized the ancient unspoken code of brotherhood, a primal instinct to defend their territory, their sanctuary, against an outside threat. It was a loyalty born of shared hardship, of silent understanding, and though she was an outsider, she had, in a single defining moment, earned a place, however temporary, within their rigid hierarchy. This nascent alliance, fragile as it was, provided a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. It was not enough to defeat Silas Sterling, but it might be enough to buy time, to create the necessary window for a final, desperate gambit. The cold steel of the shipyard, once a symbol of her solitude, now hummed with the quiet tension of an impending storm, a silent promise of battle. Eleanor, her academic world shattered, found herself pulled into a maelstrom of espionage and family secrets. Her mother, the quiet historian, was suddenly a ghost from a past era, a figure of incredible, terrifying power. Leo, the architecture student, saw his grandmother not as a frail, elderly woman, but as a complex, almost mythical figure whose every action, every hidden detail, suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. Their reality, once solid and predictable, had dissolved into a landscape of shadows and hidden agendas. They watched Iris, no longer with confusion, but with a dawning respect, a fearful understanding of the depths of her sacrifice. The past was not just history for Eleanor. It was a living, breathing threat, and her mother was at its epicenter. The realization that their matriarch, for all her fragility and quiet demeanor, had lived a life of such profound deception, of such monumental consequences, was both bewildering and strangely empowering. It forced them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about her, about their family, and about the very nature of their seemingly ordinary existence. The silence that hung between them was thick with unasked questions, with the heavy weight of a legacy suddenly revealed. Their roles had shifted. They were no longer passive observers, but unwilling participants, bound by the magnetic pull of Iris's dangerous past. The shipyard's vastness, once intimidating, now felt like a stage, perfectly set for the unfolding drama of their unraveling lives, a space where the echoes of the Cold War were about to collide with the raw, unpolished loyalty of the Iron Reapers. The air, heavy with the scent of brine and anticipation, was a harbinger of the storm to come. Iris knew that the confrontation was inevitable. Silas Sterling, with his cold, calculated mind and his limitless resources, would not stop until he had retrieved what he considered his. The old knucklehead, a silent witness to decades of secrets, was both the key and the cage. She felt the vibrations of the engine beneath her fingertips, a familiar rhythm that was both comforting and terrifying. It was her creation, her burden, and now her last chance. The Iron Reapers, though hardened, were unprepared for the ruthlessness of Silas's pursuit. Their loyalty was a shield, but it was a shield against fists and chains, not against the invisible currents of geopolitical power. She had to act, and she had to act alone, drawing on the very skills she had so desperately tried to bury. Her mind raced, dissecting probabilities, calculating trajectories, recalling every detail of the electrokinetic charge device's intricate design. It was a weapon of mass disruption, a silent scream that could deafen an entire city's technology, plunging it into a chaotic darkness. Her hands, despite their tremor, remembered the precise movements, the delicate sequence of activation. This was not merely about escaping. It was about severing the last tendrils of her past, about destroying the very monster she had helped create. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, an unbearable pressure. The past was catching up, not with a whisper, but with the deafening roar of a resurrected machine and the chilling silence of Silas Sterling's relentless pursuit. The shipyard waited, a silent, imposing monument to iron and fate, poised to witness the final explosive confrontation between a past that refused to die and a present desperate to survive. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken tension of an impending storm, an invisible battle about to erupt within the cold, unforgiving walls of the deactivated maritime cathedral. The chill that permeated the shipyard deepened, no longer merely from the sea air, but from the sudden, profound shift in Iris's carefully constructed reality. The roar of the WLA, now a rhythmic, almost predatory thrum, echoed the awakening of a past she had painstakingly buried. Silas Sterling's arrival, heralded by the silent, menacing procession of dark vehicles, was not just an intrusion. It was a surgical strike against the very fabric of her peace. His eyes, devoid of warmth, met hers across the expanse of the hangar, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, terrible history. He was a constant, a fixed point in the ever-shifting landscape of her nightmares, embodying the calculated cruelty of a system she had once served. Iris felt the phantom weight of blueprints in her hands, the cold logic of equations that had once consumed her. The electrokinetic charge device, a marvel of disruption she had poured her genius into, was now a spectre, haunting her present. It was designed for a world of shadows and Cold War machinations, not for the dusty, oil-stained reality of a biker gang's sanctuary. She understood Silas's objective with unnerving clarity, not retribution but repossession. The machine, her creation, was a tool, and tools in Silas's world belonged to their architects or to those who wielded greater power. The Iron Reapers, however, moved with an instinct born of generations lived on the fringe. Finnegan, the club's stoic founder, whose wisdom was etched into the lines around his eyes, saw not a fragile old woman, but a challenge, an affront to their unwritten code of sovereignty. His gaze, usually detached, sharpened with a quiet resolve. He had witnessed the resurrection of his own history in the WLA's revival, and that act, however mysterious, had forged an unspoken bond. The men mirrored his unspoken command, their postures subtly shifting, their casual stances hardening into a defensive formation around Iris, Eleanor, and Leo. It wasn't about understanding the intricacies of Cold War espionage. It was about territory, about the sanctity of their ninho, and about a nascent, raw loyalty to a woman who had, against all odds, breathed life back into their most cherished symbol. Their defiance was not a roar, but a silent, collective refusal to yield. This nuanced transformation, from skeptical observers to protective allies, was a testament to Iris's unintentional yet profound impact. She had, by her singular act of restoration, ignited an ancient protective fire within them. Eleanor, navigating this sudden, brutal awakening, found her historian's mind struggling to reconcile the archival precision of her academic life with the terrifying, unfolding drama before her. Her mother, the gentle chronicler of the past, was now a living fragment of it, a figure of dangerous knowledge and immense, terrifying consequence. The revelation of the Black Lotus Project, of her mother's role in creating devices that could silence entire nations, resonated with the chilling precision of a historical document suddenly brought to life. She watched Iris, not as a frail matriarch, but as a warrior, her mind a fortress of intricate calculations. The daughter, accustomed to deciphering ancient texts, now found herself trying to read the unwritten language of her mother's past, a narrative far more complex and perilous than any she had ever encountered in dusty archives. The protective instinct, dormant within her academic shell, now surged forward, a primal current connecting her to her mother's unveiled vulnerability. Leo, with the structural precision of an architecture student, saw the shipyard not merely as a decaying edifice, but as a stage, its vast spaces and cold steel echoing with the weight of unseen forces. His grandmother's transformation from quiet, elderly woman to a central figure in a high-stakes geopolitical drama was not merely bewildering. It was a complete reconstruction of his understanding of reality. He observed Iris's calm under pressure, the subtle shift in her eyes as she assessed Silas, the almost imperceptible movements of her hands as she analyzed the motorcycle, her creation, her burden, her potential weapon. He saw the intricate architecture of her deception, a life meticulously designed to conceal, and felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. His mind, trained to perceive structural integrity and points of failure, began to piece together the fragments of her confession, understanding the profound personal cost of her genius, the realization that the very machine that symbolized the Iron Reaper's pride also contained a dormant weapon of immense power sent a shiver down his spine. The cold steel of the shipyard now held the warmth of their collective fear, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the surface of the impending confrontation. Iris felt the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air as Silas Sterling's men began to fan out, their movements precise, economical, betraying years of rigorous training. They were not common thugs. They were instruments, extensions of Silas's cold, unyielding will. Her gaze lingered on Silas, not with fear but with a detached clinical assessment. She knew him. She knew the rhythm of his calculations, the predictable trajectory of his ambition. His cruelty wasn't born of malice, but of a cold, rational belief in a greater, more ruthless good. He saw the Black Lotus Project as a necessity, a vital component of global stability, and Iris, the defector, was merely an anomaly to be corrected. Her act of fixing the WLA, though an impulsive unraveling of her carefully constructed anonymity, had also reignited a spark of her former self, the brilliant engineer, the strategic mind. She knew the capabilities of the electrokinetic charge device better than anyone, for she had designed its every circuit, programmed its every pulse. It was a weapon of disruption, a silent scream that could deafen an entire city's technology, plunging it into a chaotic darkness, and she had to be the one to unleash its full, precise power. The WLA, now throbbing with revived life, was no longer just a vintage motorcycle. It was the nexus of their escalating crisis. Its reinforced chassis, the military-grade titanium alloy, was not merely a mechanical enhancement. It was a physical manifestation of her past, a tangible reminder of the power she once wielded. The electrokinetic charge device concealed within its metallic shell was a dormant beast awaiting her command. The decision, when it came, was not born of panic, but of a cold, calculating resolve. She had to sever the last tendrils of her past, not just for herself, but for Eleanor and Leo, for the fragile hope of a future untainted by the ghosts of the Cold War. The Iron Reaper's loyalty, though a powerful shield, was insufficient against the invisible currents of geopolitical power that Silas represented. She had to act, and she had to act alone, drawing on the very skills she had so desperately tried to bury. Her mind raced, dissecting probabilities, calculating trajectories, recalling every detail of the electrokinetic charge device's intricate design. It was a weapon of mass disruption, a silent scream that could deafen an entire city's technology, plunging it into a chaotic darkness. Her hands, despite their tremor, remembered the precise movements, the delicate sequence of activation. This was not merely about escaping, it was about destroying the very monster she had helped create, about ensuring it could never again fall into the wrong hands. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, an unbearable pressure. The past was catching up, not with a whisper, but with the deafening roar of a resurrected machine and the chilling silence of Silas Sterling's relentless pursuit. The shipyard waited, a silent, imposing monument to iron and fate, poised to witness the final explosive confrontation between a past that refused to die and a present desperate to survive. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken tension of an impending storm, an invisible battle, about to erupt within the cold, unforgiving walls of the deactivated maritime cathedral. The subtle movements of Silas's team escalated from observation to a tightening perimeter. The sharp glint of concealed weapons became visible, reflecting the ambient light of the dusty shipyard. Each man moved with the practiced economy of a predator, their eyes scanning for weaknesses, for any opportunity to seize their target. Iris felt the precise rhythm of their advance, a silent, choreographed dance of control. It was a chess game played on a grand scale, and she was the queen, trapped between the relentless pursuit of Silas and the protective, yet vulnerable, wall of the Iron Reapers. She knew their limits, the rough-hewn loyalty of the bikers, their strength in numbers, but their absolute unpreparedness for this kind of enemy. This was not a street fight. It was an operation, executed by professionals who understood the nuances of silent extraction and technological superiority. Her heart, though burdened, did not falter. Instead, it beat with a renewed, almost fierce determination. She had designed the device for moments like these, for the precise calibration of chaos required to escape the inescapable. The hum of the WLA beneath her hands was no longer just the sound of a restored engine. It was a promise, a final, desperate card to play. Every detail, every component she had hidden, every circuit she had soldered, now coalesced into a single, terrifyingly beautiful strategy. The shipyard, once a symbol of her quiet penance, was now transforming into an arena for her final act of defiance, a stage where the cold, unyielding logic of her past would confront the raw, visceral desire to protect her future and that of her family. The air, heavy with the scent of brine and anticipation, was a harbinger of the storm to come, a silent, almost reverent witness to the unfolding drama. Silas, meanwhile, observed Iris with a calculating gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He had known her genius, recognized the signs of her brilliance even in her carefully constructed disguise. Her act of repairing the WLA was not a surprise to him. It was an inevitability. The system she had built, the one she had defected to prevent from being fully weaponized, had a gravitational pull, drawing its creator back to its core. He had tracked her for decades, a persistent shadow, waiting for the precise moment when her carefully maintained anonymity would crack. And now that moment had arrived, triggered by the very machine that was once her Trojan horse. He saw her assess his men, analyze their movements, and a flicker of respect, cold and detached, crossed his face. He knew she was formulating a plan, preparing for a last stand. But Silas was equally prepared. He had anticipated her every move, understood the underlying logic of her engineering mind. He wasn't after revenge. He was after the complete schematics, the full operational capabilities of the Black Lotus project, locked away not only within the motorcycle, but within Iris's own brilliant, tormented mind. The WLA was merely a catalyst, a physical manifestation of the knowledge he sought to recover. His objective was clear, his methods ruthless, and his resolve unshakable. The shipyard, with its decaying grandeur, was merely the location for the final acquisition, a backdrop to the unfolding climax of a silent war that had spanned half a century. The tension, almost unbearable, crackled in the air, a precursor to the violent storm about to erupt. The air in the shipyard grew heavy, thick with the unspoken tension of an impending storm. Iris, a figure of profound contradiction, frail yet formidable, an elderly widow concealing the intellect of a strategic engineer, stood at the precipice of her past and her children's uncertain future. Her blue eyes, once distant, now held a fierce, unwavering focus, dissecting the landscape of chaos unfolding before her. Silas Sterling, her former colleague, mirrored her intensity, his gaze a cold, calculating laser, fixed on the very knowledge Iris guarded. He moved with a predatory grace, his presence a dark echo of the power he represented. The Iron Reapers, once dismissed as mere background, had subtly shifted their stance. Finnegan, their patriarch, a man whose silence often spoke louder than words, now radiated a quiet strength, a palpable defiance. His gaze, usually fixed on the horizon of the road, now encompassed Iris, Eleanor, and Leo within his protective perimeter. This unexpected shield, forged from the crucible of shared threat and an unspoken code of honor, was fragile, but it was there. Iris's mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and foresight, processed the unfolding scene with chilling precision. Silas's men, a phalanx of trained operatives, were closing in. Their movements, devoid of emotion, were a testament to their rigorous training, each man a precisely calibrated extension of Sterling's will. She observed their synchronized approach, the subtle hand signals, the way their eyes meticulously swept the cavernous space, identifying egress points, potential threats. This was not a negotiation, it was an acquisition. The old knucklehead, a silent observer of decades of secrets, now hummed a dangerous melody, its revitalized engine a ticking clock. The electrokinetic charge device, hidden within its robust frame, was not merely a weapon. It was a desperate gambit, her last remaining card. She had designed it for disruption, for the precise creation of chaos, for an escape that left no electronic trace. Now, that theoretical escape was an urgent imperative, a stark choice between the annihilation of her past and the preservation of her family's future. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, a burden of creation and consequence. Eleanor, the historian, found herself thrust into a living, breathing narrative, far more visceral than any archived text. Her mother, the quiet chronicler of mundane details, was now a figure of immense, terrifying power, her past unraveling like an ancient scroll. The revelation of the Black Lotus Project, of devices capable of silencing nations, resonated with the chilling precision of a historical prophecy suddenly fulfilled. She watched Iris, not as a frail matriarch, but as a warrior, her mind a fortress of intricate calculations. The daughter, accustomed to deciphering ancient texts, now found herself trying to rid the unwritten language of her mother's past, a narrative far more complex and perilous than any she had ever encountered in dusty archives. The protective instinct, long dormant within her academic shell, surged forward, a primal current connecting her to her mother's unveiled vulnerability. She reached out, her hand finding Iris's, a silent plea for understanding, for guidance in this terrifying new reality. Leo, the architecture student, saw the shipyard not merely as a decaying edifice, but as a stage, its vast spaces and cold steel echoing with the weight of unseen forces. His grandmother's transformation from quiet elderly woman to a central figure in a high-stakes geopolitical drama was not merely bewildering, it was a complete reconstruction of his understanding of reality. He observed Iris's calm under pressure, the subtle shift in her eyes as she assessed Silas, the almost imperceptible movements of her hands as she analyzed the motorcycle, her creation, her burden, her potential weapon. He saw the intricate architecture of her deception, a life meticulously designed to conceal, and felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. His mind, trained to perceive structural integrity and points of failure, began to piece together the fragments of her confession, understanding the profound personal cost of her genius. The realization that the very machine that symbolized the Iron Reaper's pride also contained a dormant weapon of immense power sent a shiver down his spine. He knew with a sudden, chilling clarity that his grandmother was preparing for something monumental, something that would either save them or consume them all. The cold steel of the shipyard now held the warmth of their collective fear, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the surface of the impending confrontation. Iris felt the precise rhythm of their advance, a silent choreographed dance of control. It was a chess game, played on a grand scale, and she was the queen, trapped between the relentless pursuit of Silas and the protective yet vulnerable wall of the Iron Reapers. She knew their limits, the rough-hewn loyalty of the bikers, their strength in numbers, but their absolute unpreparedness for this kind of enemy. This was not a street fight, it was an operation, executed by professionals who understood the nuances of silent extraction and technological superiority. Her heart, though burdened, did not falter. Instead, it beat with a renewed, almost fierce, determination. She had designed the device for moments like these, for the precise calibration of chaos required to escape the inescapable. The hum of the WLA beneath her hands was no longer just the sound of a restored engine. It was a promise, a final, desperate card to play. Every detail, every component she had hidden, every circuit she had soldered, now coalesced into a single, terrifyingly beautiful strategy. The shipyard, once a symbol of her quiet penance, was now transforming into an arena for her final act of defiance, a stage where the cold, unyielding logic of her past would confront the raw, visceral desire to protect her future and that of her family. Silas, meanwhile, observed Iris with a calculating gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He had known her genius, recognized the signs of her brilliance even in her carefully constructed disguise. Her act of repairing the WLA was not a surprise to him. It was an inevitability. The system she had built, the one she had defected to prevent from being fully weaponized, had a gravitational pull drawing its creator back to its core. He had tracked her for decades, a persistent shadow, waiting for the precise moment when her carefully maintained anonymity would crack. And now that moment had arrived, triggered by the very machine that was once her Trojan horse. He saw her assess his men, analyze their movements, and a flicker of respect, cold and detached, crossed his face. He knew she was formulating a plan, preparing for a last stand. But Silas was equally prepared. He had anticipated her every move, understood the underlying logic of her engineering mind. He wasn't after revenge. He was after the complete schematics, the full operational capabilities of the Black Lotus project, locked away not only within the motorcycle, but within Iris's own brilliant, tormented mind. The WLA was merely a catalyst, a physical manifestation of the knowledge he sought to recover. His objective was clear, his methods ruthless and his resolve unshakable. The shipyard, with its decaying grandeur, was merely the location for the final acquisition, a backdrop to the unfolding climax of a silent war that had spanned half a century. The air thrummed with an escalating urgency. The Iron Reapers, though bewildered by the complexities of Iris's past, understood the primal language of threat. Finnegan, his face a mask of grim determination, exchanged a silent glance with the other senior members of the club, a wordless communication passing between them, a reaffirmation of their ancient code. Their loyalty was a shield, thick and unyielding, born of shared battles and unbroken vows. They positioned themselves, subtly at first, then with increasing deliberation, between Iris and Silas's advancing team, forming a human barricade, their leather-clad bodies a defiant challenge. Their faces, usually etched with the carefree abandon of the open road, were now set in lines of grim resolve. This was their territory, their sanctuary, and they would not see it desecrated. The low growl of the WLA, Iris's hand resting on its cool metal, seemed to vibrate through their very bones, a shared heartbeat in the face of overwhelming odds. Iris, sensing their collective resolve, felt a flicker of gratitude, a warmth piercing the cold analytical shell she had rebuilt around herself. Their raw, untamed loyalty was a force she hadn't accounted for, a variable in her carefully calculated escape plan. It complicated things, for their protection now became an integral part of her strategy. She couldn't merely vanish, leaving them to face Silas Sterling's wrath. Her plan had to account for their safety, for the nascent family she had inadvertently stumbled upon. Her eyes met Finnegan's, a deep, silent understanding passing between them, a warrior's acknowledgement, a shared commitment to an impending battle. The burden of leadership, long dormant, reignited within her. This wasn't just about destroying her past. It was about safeguarding a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The light in the vast hangar began to fade, the twilight deepening the shadows, lending an almost theatrical quality to the unfolding drama. Each clatter of metal, each distant cry of a seagull seemed amplified, imbued with a foreboding significance. Silas's men moved with increasing speed, their precision unwavering. They knew time was a finite commodity, and their quarry, though an old woman, was proving to be as elusive and cunning as ever. The atmosphere became charged, a silent countdown ticking down to the inevitable collision. The scent of salt, oil, and fear hung heavy in the air, a potent cocktail of impending conflict. Iris's gaze swept over Eleanor and Leo, a silent promise forming in her heart. She would not let them become casualties of her past. Her hand, trembling slightly, moved towards the controls of the WLA, not just to activate its engine, but to awaken the dormant beast within. The time for silent contemplation was over. The time for action had arrived. Every line on her face, every tremor in her hand spoke of the immense, almost unbearable weight of a decision that would redefine not just her life, but the delicate balance of an unseen world. The moment of truth began to coalesce, the disparate elements of the conflict drawing taut, ready to snap. Iris knew Silas's ultimate objective, not just the motorcycle, but the encrypted digital files. It secretly housed the complete architectural blueprint of the Black Lotus project, capable of rendering entire nations technologically blind. This knowledge, residing within the WLA and within her own memory, was what Silas truly sought, the final piece of a puzzle he had relentlessly pursued for decades. The motorcycle, now humming with a vibrant, almost menacing energy, was merely the vessel, the Trojan horse she had once built, now repurposed as her final weapon. Her fingers, long and still, incredibly firm, hovered over a series of almost imperceptible switches on the WLA's dashboard, modifications only she knew existed. Each switch was a memory, a fragment of her past genius, now poised to ignite a future she had fought so desperately to avoid. Silas, too, understood the gravity of the moment. He watched Iris, his eyes narrowed, his mind already anticipating her next move. He knew the hidden panel, the intricate sequence of activation. He had spent decades studying her mind, dissecting her methodologies not for love or hatred, but for the sheer intellectual challenge of outmaneuvering a genius. His goal was not simply the physical recovery of the motorcycle, but the complete, unadulterated knowledge it held, the full operational capabilities of the Black Lotus project. He saw the flicker of desperation in her eyes, mixed with a chilling resolve, and understood she would not surrender without a fight. His men tightened their formation, moving with the cold, practiced efficiency of a well-oiled machine, their weapons now openly displayed, reflecting the dim, encroaching twilight of the shipyard. The air grew thick with the unspoken promise of violence, a silent agreement that the time for negotiation had evaporated. The Iron Reapers, though bewildered by the sheer scale of the revelation, rallied with a primal ferocity. Finnegan, a man forged in the crucible of countless street battles, understood only one language: defense. His eyes, usually clouded with the quiet wisdom of age, blazed with a fierce protective fire. He positioned himself directly in front of Iris, his broad back a shield, his posture radiating an unyielding defiance. The other bikers, drawing on a loyalty woven from shared asphalt and mutual respect, formed a ragged but resolute perimeter. Their faces, hardened by years on the road, were now masks of grim determination, each man ready to meet the encroaching threat with whatever strength he possessed. They might not comprehend the intricacies of Cold War espionage or the devastating power of an electrokinetic pulse, but they understood loyalty, and they understood the unspoken contract forged when a stranger breathed life back into their most sacred relic. Their presence was not merely physical, it was a psychological barrier, a wall of unyielding human will against the cold, calculated advance of Silas Sterling's operatives. The metallic tang of oil and salt in the air now mingled with the sharper, more volatile scent of raw, defiant courage. Eleanor, witnessing the transformation of her mother, felt a strange current of fear and awe course through her. The gentle historian, the quiet chronicler of mundane details, had vanished, replaced by a figure of immense, terrifying power. The realization that her mother had been a key architect of devices capable of silencing entire nations was a dizzying, disorienting truth. She watched Iris's hands, no longer frail, but imbued with a latent strength, hovering over the controls of the WLA. There was a precision in her movements, a calm born of immense focus that spoke of a different life, a dangerous life. Eleanor's academic mind, accustomed to the logical progression of historical events, struggled to process this sudden, violent descent into a world of covert operations and strategic armaments. Her hand found Leo's, clutching it tightly, a silent anchor in a storm of revelation. She saw the fear in her son's eyes, mirrored by a dawning comprehension, and a primal maternal instinct surged within her. She would protect him, protect her mother, even if it meant stepping into the very heart of the chaos that was about to erupt. The cold steel of the shipyard, the vast, echoing space, now felt like a crucible, forging a new reality for their family, one steeped in danger and profound, untold courage. Leo, his architectural sense of structure suddenly overwhelmed by the impending chaos, saw his grandmother in a new light. Not the frail elderly woman, but a formidable engineer, a ghost from a dangerous past whose every hidden detail, every calculated move, now made terrifying sense. He watched her fingers, knowing the precision they held, understanding the immense power they were about to unleash. His mind, trained to build, now raced to comprehend how she would dismantle, how she would create chaos from order, how she would use the very principles of her creation to defend them. He saw the cold steel of the shipyard, its vast spaces, its labyrinthine passages, not as obstacles, but as potential avenues of escape, or perhaps as a trap. The roaring WLA, the symbol of the Iron Reaper's pride, was now a ticking time bomb, a silent declaration of war against the forces that sought to reclaim his grandmother's deadly legacy. He understood, with chilling clarity, that the choices his grandmother made in the next few moments would determine not just their survival, but the very fate of a technology that could plunge the world into a new kind of darkness. His fear was profound, but it was tempered by a dawning respect for the incredible strength of his matriarch, a woman who had, for half a century, carried the weight of a world's secrets. Iris's gaze swept across the faces of the Iron Reapers, a silent acknowledgement of their unexpected loyalty, their raw, untamed courage. They were a wild card, a variable she had not accounted for in her escape algorithms. Their presence, while a shield, also presented a profound vulnerability. She could not simply activate the device and disappear, leaving them to face Silas Sterling's wrath. Her plan, once designed for solo extraction, now had to incorporate the safety of this newfound, albeit temporary, family. Her eyes met Finnegan's, a silent communication passing between them, a warrior's acknowledgement, a shared commitment to the impending battle. The weight of this unexpected responsibility settled upon her, a burden of protection that was both daunting and oddly liberating. It was no longer just about destroying her past, it was about safeguarding a future she hadn't dared to imagine, a future for Eleanor and Leo, and perhaps for these grizzled men who, against all odds, had offered her their shield. The atmosphere in the shipyard grew heavy, thick with the unspoken tension of an impending storm. Silas, his calculating gaze fixed on Iris, began to issue commands, silent signals that rippled through his armed contingent. His men moved with a chilling synchronization, forming a tightening circle, a human net designed to ensnare their elusive quarry. The sharp glint of their weapons, reflecting the last vestiges of twilight, seemed to slice through the deepening shadows. Each step they took was measured, precise, betraying years of rigorous training, their movements devoid of hesitation, fueled by a ruthless efficiency. This was not a street brawl, it was a high-stakes extraction, orchestrated by a mind that understood the nuances of silent capture and technological superiority. Silas, a master of strategy, had anticipated her every move, understood the underlying logic of her engineering mind. He knew she was dangerous, cunning, and fiercely protective, but he also believed she was predictable, a variable in a larger equation he was destined to solve. Iris, her mind a whirlwind of calculations, processed the closing perimeter. She felt the vibrations of the WLA beneath her fingertips, a familiar rhythm that was both comforting and terrifying. It was her creation, her burden, and now her last chance. The electrokinetic charge device, hidden within its robust frame, was no longer a theoretical weapon. It was a desperate gambit, her final, most potent card. She had designed it for disruption, for the precise creation of chaos, for an escape that left no electronic trace, a silent scream that could deafen an entire city's technology. Now, that theoretical escape was an urgent imperative, a stark choice between the annihilation of her past and the preservation of her family's future. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, a burden of creation and consequence. Her hands, despite their tremor, remembered the precise movements, the delicate sequence of activation. This was not merely about escaping. It was about destroying the very monster she had helped create, about ensuring it could never again fall into the wrong hands. The Iron Reaper's loyalty, though a powerful shield, was insufficient against the invisible currents of geopolitical power that Silas represented. She had to act, and she had to act alone, drawing on the very skills she had so desperately tried to bury. Her mind raced, dissecting probabilities, calculating trajectories, recalling every detail of the electrokinetic charge device's intricate design. It was a weapon of mass disruption, a silent scream that could deafen an entire city's technology, plunging it into a chaotic darkness. The hum of the WLA beneath her hands was no longer just the sound of a restored engine. It was a promise, a final desperate card to play. Every detail, every component she had hidden, every circuit she had soldered, now coalesced into a single, terrifyingly beautiful strategy. The shipyard, once a symbol of her quiet penance, was now transforming into an arena for her final act of defiance, a stage where the cold, unyielding logic of her past would confront the raw, visceral desire to protect her future, and that of her family. The air, heavy with the scent of brine and anticipation, was a harbinger of the storm to come, a silent, almost reverent witness to the unfolding drama. Silas, meanwhile, observed Iris with a calculating gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He had known her genius, recognized the signs of her brilliance even in her carefully constructed disguise. Her act of repairing the WLA was not a surprise to him, it was an inevitability. The system she had built, the one she had defected to prevent from being fully weaponized, had a gravitational pull, drawing its creator back to its core. He had tracked her for decades, a persistent shadow, waiting for the precise moment when her carefully maintained anonymity would crack. And now that moment had arrived, triggered by the very machine that was once her Trojan horse. He saw her assess his men, analyze their movements, and a flicker of respect, cold and detached, crossed his face. He knew she was formulating a plan, preparing for a last stand. But Silas was equally prepared. He had anticipated her every move, understood the underlying logic of her engineering mind. He wasn't after revenge. He was after the complete schematics, the full operational capabilities of the Black Lotus project, locked away not only within the motorcycle, but within Iris's own brilliant, tormented mind. The WLA was merely a catalyst, a physical manifestation of the knowledge he sought to recover. His objective was clear, his methods ruthless, and his resolve unshakable. The shipyard with its decaying grandeur was merely the location for the final acquisition, a backdrop to the unfolding climax of a silent war that had spanned half a century. The tension, almost unbearable, crackled in the air, a precursor to the violent storm about to erupt. Iris's eyes, normally distant, now glowed with an internal fire, reflecting the cold resolve that had solidified within her. She moved with a sudden, decisive grace, her cane almost forgotten, her focus absolute. Her hand, guided by decades of ingrained knowledge, moved not to the simple ignition switch, but to a hidden panel beneath the main console of the WLA. This was the true heart of the beast, the control center for the electrokinetic charge device. Her fingers, long and skilled, danced across a sequence of recessed buttons and a tiny, almost invisible toggle switch, each movement precise, deliberate. She felt the subtle click, the faint hum of energy coursing through dormant circuits, a silent awakening that only she could perceive. The WLA, already vibrating with the thrum of its engine, now seemed to pulse with a deeper, more ominous power, an invisible current of latent energy preparing to unleash its devastating force. The air around them began to subtly shift, the metallic tang growing sharper, a precursor to the silent electromagnetic storm that was about to break. Iris's face, etched with lines of wisdom and sorrow, remained impassive, her gaze fixed, not on Silas but on an unseen future she was desperately trying to carve out of the chaotic remnants of her past. She took a deep, steadying breath, preparing for the inevitable. The silent activation, a symphony of micro-clicks known only to Iris, initiated a sequence decades in dormancy. A faint, high-pitched hum, barely perceptible, began to weave through the heavy air of the shipyard, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly against the sternum, a silent, scream-building in intensity. It was the sound of dormant power stirring, of an engineered leviathan awakening within the heart of the WLA. Iris's fingers, still poised on the reconfigured panel, felt the subtle thrumming under the metal, a tremor that resonated with the ancient, almost forgotten rhythm of her own genius. Her gaze, unflinching, met Silas Sterling's across the rapidly diminishing space. A flicker of recognition, cold and pure, passed between them, a silent dialogue between creator and relentless pursuer. Silas, for all his anticipation, could not decipher the exact moment of activation, only the subtle shift in Iris's posture, the sudden, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. His own men, impeccably trained, continued their advance, their weapons raised, reflecting the last vestiges of the fading light. They were machines themselves, extensions of Silas's unyielding will, programmed for acquisition, not comprehension of the electromagnetic storm about to break. The hum intensified, rising in pitch, a sound that began to pluck at the edges of consciousness, an auditory phantom. It was not loud, but omnipresent, infiltrating the cold steel, the very bones of the shipyard, settling into the marrow of those present. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, charged with an unseen force. Tiny motes of dust, suspended in the dwindling light, began to dance with an erratic energy, swirling in patterns that defied the laws of ordinary convection. Eleanor clutched Leo's hand tighter, her historian's mind grasping at impossible explanations, her academic rigor dissolving under the weight of this raw, inexplicable phenomenon. Leo, the architecture student, felt the very structure of the shipyard begin to resonate, a subtle vibration that threatened the foundation of his ordered world. He saw the metal beams around them, the vast, echoing space, not as stable constructs, but as resonant chambers, amplifying this silent, terrifying sound. The Iron Reapers hardened. Men of the road felt an unsettling prickle on their skin, a sensation that raised the hairs on their arms. Their bikes, parked in haphazard rows, their own mechanical hearts, seemed to shudder, their chrome surfaces glinting with an almost static electricity. Finnegan, whose face usually betrayed nothing, now held a bewildered furrow in his brow, his instinct for physical threat momentarily confused by this invisible assailant. Iris, however, remained rooted, her eyes fixed on the distant figures of Silas and his men. She knew with chilling precision the exact moment the device would unleash its pulse. It was a countdown measured in microseconds, a silent detonation that would ripple through the electromagnetic spectrum. Her reconfigured panel, a testament to decades of clandestine work, had one final crucial modification: a containment field designed to limit the blast radius to ensure that only Silas's technology, his vehicles, his communication devices would be crippled. This was not an act of indiscriminate destruction. It was a surgical strike honed by years of strategic thinking. The risk was immense. A miscalculation, a slight deviation in the magnetic field, and the entire shipyard could be plunged into a chaotic meltdown, including the Iron Reaper's beloved bikes, and more critically, the delicate human physiology of Eleanor and Leo. Her breath hitched, a silent prayer forming on her lips, not for salvation, but for precision, for the unwavering accuracy of her calculations. Silas, ever the tactician, saw the subtle tension in Iris, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand, even as her eyes burned with an unsettling resolve. He felt the faint, high-pitched hum, dismissing it as some trick, some minor electronic interference designed to distract. He urged his men forward, his silent commands more insistent, the gap between them and Iris closing rapidly. He was too close to failure, too close to allowing the ultimate prize, the full knowledge of Black Lotus, the power to cripple nations, to slip through his grasp. His objective was singular, unwavering. Acquire Iris, acquire the motorcycle, acquire the information. The faint hum was merely an irritation, a meaningless anomaly in his otherwise flawless plan. He had waited half a century for this moment. He would not be deterred by an old woman's final, pathetic act of defiance. He raised a hand, signaling his lead operative to move for a direct seizure, a precise, unhesitating grab of Iris and the WLA. But it was in that instant, just as the lead operative's hand reached out, that the silent scream culminated. The high-pitched hum abruptly ceased, replaced by a profound, instantaneous silence, a vacuum of sound that seemed to suck the very air from the shipyard. Then, with an invisible, unfelt tremor, the electrokinetic charge device exploded. There was no flash, no concussive wave, no sound audible to the human ear. It was a contained pulse, a silent, precise wave of electromagnetic energy surging outward from the WLA. It hit Silas Sterling's vehicles first. The purr of their sophisticated engines died in unison, a chorus of mechanical gasps. Headlights flickered once, then extinguished, plunging those sections of the shipyard into an abrupt, unsettling darkness. The sophisticated communication devices, the targeting systems, the tracking software embedded within their utility vehicles, all fried, their intricate circuits reduced to inert slag in an instant. The men themselves, armed with cutting-edge weaponry, felt an inexplicable jolt, a sudden, disorienting shock as their earpieces went dead, their targeting optics blinked out, their handheld devices died in their grasp. The seamless coordination that defined them shattered, replaced by a sudden jarring chaos. They stumbled, their practiced movements dissolving into disoriented confusion, their eyes darting wildly, trying to comprehend the unseen assailant that had so expertly crippled their technological superiority. Silas Sterling, too, felt the jolt, a cold shock that raced through his nervous system. His own concealed earpiece, through which he had been receiving constant updates, crackled once, then went silent. His wrist-mounted device, a marvel of miniaturized computing, went dark, its intricate display a blank, lifeless screen. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a look of stark, chilling recognition. He knew this signature, this precise, surgical electromagnetic pulse. It was her Iris, the ghost from his past, the brilliant engineer whose genius he had underestimated one final time. The very technology he sought to control, he now realized, had been turned against him, wielded by its creator with a precision he hadn't thought possible. Panic, cold and sudden, flared in his eyes, a stark contrast to his usual composure. His men, plunged into technological darkness, were rendered blind and deaf, their sophisticated training suddenly moot against an enemy they could not see, an attack they could not comprehend. The Iron Reapers, whose antique bikes and rudimentary communication systems were largely immune to the electromagnetic pulse, watched in stunned silence as Silas's men were thrown into disarray. They saw the sudden, inexplicable failure of the modern machines, the disoriented movements of the armed operatives. Finnegan, his eyes narrowed, understood this was no ordinary fight. He saw Iris, her hand still, poised, her face etched with a fierce, almost terrifying calm. He had seen strange things on the road, but nothing quite like this. The sudden, uncharacteristic panic that gripped Silas and his Kapangas created an unexpected, invaluable window of opportunity. The dark vehicles, now mere hulks of metal, stood useless, their sophisticated systems rendered inert. The men, their precision shattered, their communication lines severed, were no longer a cohesive unit, but a scattered collection of bewildered individuals. Iris, seizing the fleeting advantage, her voice, usually frail, now rang with a startling clarity and authority. "Now!" she commanded, her gaze sweeping over Eleanor, Leo, and Finnegan. It was a single, urgent word, cutting through the lingering silence, a beacon in the sudden technological darkness. Eleanor, her mind still reeling, reacted with a primal maternal instinct. She pulled Leo, who was already staring at his grandmother, with a mixture of terror and profound, down towards the nearest exit, a shadowy alleyway leading out of the main hangar. The Iron Reapers, responding to Finnegan's guttural roar, sprung into action. Their movements, rough and unpolished, were driven by an ancient, visceral instinct for survival and a newfound loyalty to the old woman who had just defied the impossible. They converged on their remaining functioning bikes, their engines roaring to life with a defiant clamor, a stark contrast to the deathly silence that had fallen over Silas's convoy. The air, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and fear, was suddenly thick with the thrum of powerful engines, the shouts of men, and the raw urgency of a desperate escape. Iris, with a final lingering touch on the WLA's panel, turned. The motorcycle, her creation, her burden, her weapon, now stood as a silent monument to the chaos she had unleashed. She gave it one last, almost sorrowful look, a recognition of the double-edged sword of her genius. Then, with surprising agility, she moved, her cane clicking rapidly on the concrete floor, following Eleanor and Leo into the shadows. The Iron Reapers, forming a protective vanguard and rearguard, their bikes thundering, enveloped the Vance family, their leather jackets and chrome-plated machines, a defiant blur against the encroaching darkness. The roar of their engines filled the vast, cavernous shipyard, a symphony of rebellion, drowning out the disoriented cries of Silas Sterling's men. The old metal structure seemed to sigh, witnessing the dramatic escape, the silent flight of a ghost from a past that refused to remain buried. The chaos that ensued was a calculated symphony of disruption, perfectly orchestrated by Iris, creating the precise window of escape she had meticulously planned. The shipyard, once a cathedral of rust and sorrow, was now an arena, scarred by the echoes of a silent war that had spanned half a century, leaving behind a profound stillness punctuated only by the lingering scent of ozone and the fading roar of departing engines. Silas, alone in the sudden silence, surrounded by his crippled machines and disoriented men, could only watch as his quarry, the woman and the knowledge he had hunted for decades, vanished into the night, carried away by an alliance he had never anticipated. The weight of his failure was a palpable thing, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of his stomach. The immediate aftermath of the electrokinetic charge device's silent detonation was a tapestry of controlled chaos. The roar of the Iron Reaper's engines, a defiant counterpoint to the electronic silence, vibrated through the very bones of the shipyard, each thrumming machine a beating heart against the still, crippled forms of Silas Sterling's convoy. Iris, propelled by an almost supernatural surge of adrenaline, moved with a surprising fluidity, her elegant orthopedic cane tapping a rhythmic staccato against the concrete, a counterpoint to the frantic yet organized escape. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, swept across the faces of Eleanor and Leo. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and nascent understanding, reflected the dizzying speed at which their world had been irrevocably altered. Eleanor, her historian's mind still grappling with the impossible, felt the raw primal urge to protect her son, pulling Leo along with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Leo, observing his grandmother's unexpected agility and command, saw the architecture of his familiar world crumbling, replaced by a structure of hidden strength and perilous secrets. The Iron Reapers, their rough-hewn loyalty solidified into a fierce resolve, formed a living, thundering shield. Finnegan, his face a mask of grim determination, bellowed a series of sharp, guttural commands that cut through the engine noise, directing his men with the precision of a seasoned commander. Two burly bikers, their leather jackets gleaming faintly in the dimming light, positioned their powerful machines immediately behind Iris and her family, their headlights carving temporary tunnels through the encroaching gloom. Others fanned out, creating a dynamic perimeter, their bikes weaving and merging with an almost instinctual grace, a practiced ballet of protection born from countless miles on the open road. The sheer visceral power of their machines, raw and untamed, was a stark contrast to the sterile, silenced vehicles of Silas Sterling's force. The scent of burning fuel, of hot metal and leather, mingled with the lingering sharp tang of ozone left by Iris's electrokinetic pulse, a powerful, almost intoxicating cocktail that fueled their desperate flight. The air, heavy with the weight of consequence, now thrummed with the vibrant energy of defiance. Silas Sterling, left in the sudden, deafening silence, stood amidst the wreckage of his technologically superior force. His face, usually a mask of cold composure, was contorted with a mixture of disbelief and searing rage. The faint smirk, a constant companion to his intellectual arrogance, had been wiped clean, replaced by the stark, terrifying realization of his defeat. He watched, helpless, as Iris, the elusive phantom he had hunted for half a century, vanished into the night, swallowed by the thundering convoy of the Iron Reapers. His men, disoriented and stripped of their electronic lifelines, stumbled amidst their dead vehicles, their sophisticated training rendered useless against an attack they could not comprehend. The meticulously planned extraction, years in the making, had crumbled in an instant, undone by the very genius he had sought to reclaim. The vast, cavernous shipyard, once the stage for his triumph, now echoed with the hollow sound of his failure, each metallic clang amplifying the crushing weight of his miscalculation. He felt the cold, hard grip of frustration, a sensation alien to his controlled world, tightening its hold around his chest. He had underestimated her, not her brilliance, but her capacity for unexpected, desperate action, her willingness to sacrifice everything to protect her newfound freedom. The Iron Reapers, these primitive, unrefined outliers, had become an unforeseen variable, a chaotic element in his perfectly calculated equation. Their loyalty, a force he had dismissed as irrelevant, had become the unbreachable wall that protected his quarry. He looked at the WLA, now standing silently where Iris had left it, its engine a quiet hum, a mocking testament to her power. It was still there, but the knowledge it contained, the woman who held its true secrets, was gone. Iris, ensconced within the thundering embrace of the Iron Reapers, felt a strange, intoxicating mix of exhilaration and profound exhaustion. The adrenaline which had propelled her through the climactic moments began to recede, leaving behind a deep tremor in her hands, a hollow ache in her bones. She glanced back, through the gaps in the roaring bikes, at the silent figures of Silas Sterling and his bewildered men, now mere dots in the receding distance. The sense of triumph was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the chilling knowledge that this was merely a temporary reprieve, not a definitive end. Silas would not give up. His ambition, his relentless pursuit of the Black Lotus technology, was a force as unyielding as gravity. This escape was an evasion, a surgical retreat. But the war, the silent geopolitical conflict that had defined half her life, was far from over. Eleanor, her hand still clutching Leo's, found her gaze drawn to her mother. The image of Iris, frail yet commanding, orchestrating an electromagnetic pulse with the precise grace of a maestro, had forever altered her perception of the quiet historian. The academic understanding of history, of grand narratives and pivotal moments, now intertwined with the deeply personal, terrifying reality of her own family's hidden past. Her mother was not just a historical figure. She was a living, breathing paradox, a testament to the destructive power of knowledge and the profound resilience of the human spirit. The ride was rough, the bikes thundering over uneven ground, but Eleanor felt a strange sense of belonging, an unexpected safety within the roaring, leather-clad embrace of the Iron Reapers. These men, once intimidating strangers, were now their unlikely protectors, drawn into their family's war by a shared, unspoken code. Leo, perched precariously on the back of one of the biker's machines, his architectural mind struggling to process the unfolding chaos, saw his grandmother not as a frail, elderly woman, but as a legendary figure, a ghost brought to life, whose every hidden detail, every calculated move, now made terrifying, perfect sense. He felt the cold rush of the wind, the vibrations of the powerful engine beneath him, and a strange sense of wonder mingled with his fear. The shipyard, with its vast spaces and cold steel, had been a stage for a drama far grander than any he could have imagined. His grandmother, the quiet chronicler, was a warrior, a brilliant engineer who had, with a single, precise act, crippled an entire force of technologically advanced operatives. The image of Silas Sterling's men stumbling in disarray, their sophisticated machines silenced, was burned into his memory, a powerful testament to the destructive yet protective genius of Iris Thorne. He understood with chilling clarity that the choices his grandmother had made decades ago, and the choices she continued to make, would not only define their lives but ripple outwards, affecting an unseen world. The convoy of Iron Reapers, now a blur of chrome and black leather, sped away from the shipyard, their engines roaring a symphony of escape. Their powerful machines effortlessly navigating the labyrinthine backroads and forgotten pathways that snaked along the coast. The metallic tang of ozone gradually faded, replaced by the familiar comforting scent of salt and sea air, a reminder of the vast open world beyond the confines of the shipyard's rusty embrace. Iris, cradled between two of the burliest bikers, felt the wind whip through her hair, a sensation that was both invigorating and strangely liberating. The years of hiding, of self-imposed anonymity, had instilled in her a deep-seated fear of exposure, a constant gnawing anxiety that her past would inevitably catch up to her. But in this moment of desperate flight, surrounded by these unlikely allies, she felt a profound sense of paradoxical freedom. She was exposed, yes, but she was also protected, carried forward by a force she had never anticipated, a loyalty she had never sought. Finnegan, leading the charge, occasionally glanced back, his eyes scanning the road for any signs of pursuit. He knew Silas Sterling, or at least his type, men who operated outside the law, with resources and ruthlessness that far exceeded any street gang. He understood that this was not a simple chase. It was a game of hunter and hunted, played out on a scale far beyond his usual purview, yet a fierce protectiveness had ignited within him, a primal instinct to defend his own, even if his own was a mysterious old woman who had, with a single, precise gesture, restored the heart of their club. Their loyalty was not born of convenience, but of a deeper, unspoken understanding, a recognition of raw strength, of defiance against overwhelming odds. The WLA, Finnegan's founder's bike, now, silent and abandoned in the shipyard, was a symbol of their renewed pride, a testament to Iris's unexpected gift, and that gift demanded reciprocal protection. Eleanor and Leo, jostled by the rough ride, found a strange comfort in the rhythmic roar of the engines. The world beyond the bikers' protective formation seemed to shrink, fading into the background, as their immediate reality became the urgent, forward motion of their escape. Eleanor, her mind still racing, began to piece together the fragments of her mother's confession, connecting the dots between the quiet academic and the brilliant aerospace engineer. The concept of the Black Lotus project, of devices capable of rendering entire nations technologically deaf and blind, resonated with the chilling precision of a historical prophecy suddenly brought to life. Her mother was not just a historical figure, she was a living, breathing paradox, a testament to the destructive power of knowledge and the profound resilience of the human spirit. She looked at Leo, his face pale yet alight with a fearful awe, and a new resolve solidified within her. They were in this together, bound by the magnetic pull of Iris's dangerous past, and they would face whatever came next, together. The night swallowed them whole, the thundering convoy of the Iron Reapers a fleeting shadow against the vast, indifferent landscape. The cold, analytical genius of Iris Thorne, the desperate courage of Eleanor and Leo, and the raw, untamed loyalty of the Iron Reapers had coalesced into a single, unstoppable force, at least for now. The shipyard, with its decaying grandeur, was left behind, a silent witness to the explosive climax of a silent war that had spanned half a century, leaving behind a profound stillness punctuated only by the lingering scent of ozone and the fading roar of departing engines. Silas, alone in the sudden silence, surrounded by his crippled machines and disoriented men, could only watch as his quarry, the woman, and the knowledge he had hunted for decades, vanished into the night, carried away by an alliance he had never anticipated. The weight of his failure was a palpable thing, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of his stomach, a bitter taste that mingled with the acrid scent of burnt electronics. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was far from over. The hunt would continue, relentless and unforgiving, until the full power of Black Lotus and the brilliant mind that created it were finally under his control. The night was long, and the shadows, now stretched thin by the moon, seemed to whisper promises of retribution. The silence, once a symbol of his control, was now a mocking testament to his defeat. This story delves into the profound weight of hidden pasts and unexpected loyalties. Have you ever felt the subtle shift when a deep, long-buried secret begins to surface, changing the very foundation of your relationships? Share in the comments how you navigated that complex terrain, the quiet signs, the internal struggle, or the moment of revelation that transformed everything. The convoy of Iron Reapers, now a blurred symphony of chrome and black leather, sped relentlessly away from the shipyard, their engines roaring a defiant song of escape. The metallic tang of ozone gradually dissipated, yielding to the familiar, comforting aroma of salt and sea air, a gentle reminder of the vast, open world that lay beyond the confines of the shipyard's rusty embrace. Iris, cradled between two of the burliest bikers, felt the wind whip through her silver hair, a sensation that was both invigorating and strangely liberating. The decades of hiding, of self-imposed anonymity, had etched into her a deep-seated fear of exposure, a constant gnawing anxiety that her past, like a predator, would inevitably catch up to her. But in this moment of desperate flight, surrounded by these unlikely allies, she felt a profound sense of paradoxical freedom. She was exposed. Yes, her carefully constructed illusion shattered, but she was also protected, carried forward by a force she had never anticipated, a fierce loyalty she had never sought. Her gaze, though fixed on the receding landscape, held a deep, unblinking assessment of the situation. This was not an end, but a vital pause, a strategic repositioning in a war that had spanned half a century. Silas Sterling, she knew, was not a man to be deterred by a single setback. His ambition, his relentless pursuit of the Black Lotus technology, was a force as unyielding as gravity, a constant against which she had to meticulously recalibrate her every move. The image of his contorted face, frozen in disbelief amidst the wreckage of his technologically superior force, was a fleeting victory, a moment of satisfaction quickly overshadowed by the chilling certainty of his unwavering resolve. The hunt, she understood, would continue, relentless and unforgiving, until the full power of Black Lotus and the brilliant mind that created it were finally under his control. The night was long, and the shadows, now stretched thin by the moon, seemed to whisper promises of retribution. The silence that now descended upon the abandoned shipyard, once a symbol of his control, was now a mocking testament to his defeat, a cold, empty echo of his profound miscalculation. Finnegan, leading the charge, occasionally glanced back, his eyes, usually narrowed against the sun and wind, now meticulously scanning the winding road for any lingering signs of pursuit. He knew Silas Sterling, or at least his type, men who operated outside the conventional boundaries of law and order, but with resources and a ruthlessness that far exceeded any street gang's capability. He understood with a grim clarity that this was not a simple chase but a high-stakes game of hunter and hunted, played out on a scale far beyond his usual purview of turf wars and local disputes. Yet, a fierce protectiveness had ignited within him, a primal instinct to defend his own, even if his own was a mysterious old woman who had with a single precise gesture restored the very heart of their club. Their loyalty was not born of convenience, or even of a complete understanding of her past, but of a deeper unspoken recognition, a respect for raw strength, for defiance against overwhelming odds, and for the life she had breathed back into Bishop's venerated WLA. That machine, now silent and abandoned in the shipyard, was a symbol of their renewed pride, a tangible testament to Iris's unexpected gift, and that gift, in their unwritten code, demanded reciprocal protection, an unwavering shield against the encroaching darkness. Finnegan's heavy hand gripped the handlebars, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, guiding his makeshift convoy with the unwavering certainty of a seasoned leader. The wind whipped past, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of ozone and fear they had just escaped. Eleanor and Leo, jostled by the rough rhythmic ride of the motorcycles, found a strange, unexpected comfort in the powerful thrum of the engines. The world beyond the bikers' protective formation seemed to shrink, fading into a distant, almost abstract background as their immediate reality became the urgent forward motion of their escape. Eleanor, her historian's mind still reeling from the dizzying descent into a world of espionage and covert operations, began, even amidst the chaos, to piece together the fragments of her mother's confession. She connected the dots between the quiet academic, the meticulous chronicler of mundane details, and the brilliant aerospace engineer who had created devices capable of rendering entire nations technologically deaf and blind. The concept of the Black Lotus Project, once an abstract historical nightmare, now resonated with the chilling precision of a living prophecy, a terrifying truth embedded within her own family's legacy. Her mother was not just a historical figure, she was a living, breathing paradox, a testament to the destructive power of knowledge and the profound resilience of the human spirit. She looked at Leo, his face pale yet alight with a fearful awe, and a new resolve solidified within her. They were in this together, bound by the magnetic pull of Iris's dangerous past, and they would face whatever came next. Together, the unexpected alliance with the Iron Reapers, these rough-hewn men of the road, provided a nascent sense of community, a fragile but vital bulwark against the terrifying forces that now pursued them. The convoy continued its relentless pace, the night swallowing them whole, the thundering roar of the Iron Reapers, a fleeting shadow against the vast, indifferent landscape. They moved through forgotten roads, past slumbering towns, the rhythmic growl of their engines a primal heartbeat against the silence of the countryside. Iris, her mind a fortress of strategic calculations, knew that mere escape was insufficient. Silas Sterling would eventually pinpoint their trajectory, his resources vast, his network far-reaching. The true danger lay not just in her continued existence, but in the potential for the Black Lotus technology to be fully weaponized, to fall into hands that would wield it without her moral compass. The encrypted digital files, containing the complete architectural blueprints of the prototype, remained the ultimate prize, the toxic inheritance she had sought to bury. They were her creation, her ultimate burden, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that they had to be destroyed, permanently. The motorcycle, the WLA, now abandoned in the shipyard, was merely a decoy, its physical presence a distraction. The real threat, the true power, lay in the information, the knowledge encoded within those digital files, knowledge that was also imprinted, ineradicably, within her own brilliant, tormented mind. As the first streaks of dawn painted the horizon in hues of bruised purple and rose, the convoy finally slowed, pulling off the main road into a secluded, overgrown clearing nestled deep within a thick grove of ancient trees. The air here was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the metallic odors of the shipyard. The Iron Reapers dismounted, their movements surprisingly quiet for men of their bulk, their faces etched with a weary but watchful resolve. Finnegan approached Iris, his gaze assessing, a silent question in his eyes. He understood without words that this was not a permanent sanctuary. Iris, her elegant cane tapping softly against the damp earth, met his gaze with a steady, unwavering intensity. "The shipyard has a foundry," she stated, her voice calm, devoid of the tremor that had laced it during the confrontation, a place of transformation, of fire. Her words, though few, carried a profound weight, a chilling clarity that resonated with Finnegan's own understanding of cycles, of endings and beginnings. He remembered the massive, imposing structure, a relic of a bygone industrial era, a cathedral of heat and molten metal. Its very purpose was annihilation and rebirth, a fitting stage for the final act of her self-imposed penance. Eleanor and Leo, dismounting from the bikes, looked at Iris with a mixture of apprehension and a dawning understanding. The quiet historian had spoken of a foundry, a place of intense heat, and Leo, with his architectural mind, immediately grasped the symbolic weight of her words. He understood that his grandmother was not merely seeking refuge, she was planning an act of definitive, irreversible destruction. The implication of her statement hung heavy in the dawn air, cold and stark. The Black Lotus Project, the devastating technology, the encrypted files, they had to be consumed, rendered utterly inert, transformed into nothing but ash and memory. The gravity of this decision, the finality of it, pressed down on them all. Iris, her face etched with a lifetime of experience and an enduring sorrow, turned to her daughter and grandson. Her blue eyes, though weary, held a fierce, unblinking determination. This was not merely about survival, it was about redemption, about severing the last tendrils of a dangerous past, ensuring that the monster she had helped create would never again see the light of day. Her gaze swept over the Iron Reapers, a silent acknowledgement of their unwavering loyalty, their unexpected presence in the final somber act of her personal war. The silence of the clearing was now filled with the unspoken weight of collective resolve, a shared commitment to a future free from the haunting echoes of the Cold War. The foundry awaited, a silent, imposing monument to fire and transformation, poised to witness the incineration of a secret that had plagued a brilliant mind for half a century. Iris took a deep, steadying breath, preparing for the final, most painful act of letting go. The weight of the world, it seemed, rested on her elegant, trembling hands. Iris led them back, not with the hurried desperation of a fugitive, but with the measured stride of someone fulfilling a long-deferred destiny. The return journey to the Camus decommissioned maritime shipyard was cloaked in the pre-dawn silence, the Iron Reapers' powerful machines now moving with an almost reverent quiet, their engines a low thrum against the encroaching light. Each biker, usually boisterous and unreserved, seemed to sense the gravity of Iris's purpose, their usual bravado replaced by a somber respect. Finnegan, riding alongside her, offered no words, only a series of glances that conveyed a deep, unspoken understanding. He had seen enough to know that some battles were fought, not with fists or chrome, but with the quiet courage of a soul confronting its own shadowed past. The metallic tang of ozone still lingered faintly in the air. As they approached the looming skeletal structure of the shipyard, a stark reminder of the night's explosive climax. The WLA, abandoned earlier, stood as a silent sentinel, its chrome now dulled by a thin layer of dew, a relic awaiting its final reckoning. Silas Sterling and his crippled forces were gone, the only evidence of their presence being the scattered debris and the lingering impression of violence in the air. But Iris knew he would be back. This was merely a temporary retreat for a predator whose ambition was insatiable. The true battle, the one that would ensure the Black Lotus technology could never again rise, was yet to be fought, not against an external enemy, but against the very essence of her own creation. Her focus, however, was not on the lingering threat of Silas, but on the massive Fornalha de Fundição that dominated a far corner of the shipyard. It was an ancient behemoth of cast iron and brick, a testament to an industrial era now long past. Its massive, maw, usually dark and cold, stood as the ultimate instrument of oblivion, capable of transforming matter into memory, secrets into ash. As they dismounted, the soft scuff of their boots on the concrete seemed amplified in the pre-dawn quiet, each step carrying the weight of an impending ritual. Iris walked with a renewed sense of purpose, her elegant cane tapping a firm, rhythmic beat that resonated with the beating of her own resolute heart. Eleanor and Leo followed closely, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and profound dawning comprehension. They watched their matriarch, not as a frail old woman, but as a priestess preparing for a sacrifice, her movements imbued with a stark, almost sacred intentionality. The Iron Reapers, too, gathered around, their burly figures forming a silent semicircle, their eyes fixed on Iris, their leader Finnegan, his face grim, standing closest to her, a pillar of silent support. The air, heavy with the scent of rust and damp concrete, now held a faint, almost imperceptible smell of ash, a premonition of the destruction to come. Iris reached the base of the colossal furnace, its cold metal surface reflecting the nascent light of dawn. She ran a hand over its pitted exterior, a touch that acknowledged its power, its unyielding finality. She paused, then turned to Eleanor, her blue eyes, though weary, holding a depth of emotion that spoke of a lifetime of burdens. "The files," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely audible above the gentle lap of unseen waves beyond the shipyard walls. "They contain everything. The complete blueprints of Black Lotus, the designs, the calculations, the methods of nullification, all of it." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Leo, then Finnegan, her words a quiet declaration of the immense, terrifying power she had once helped unleash. "This," she continued, her voice gaining a subtle tremor, "is the monster I helped create, and it must be unmade, utterly and irrevocably." There was no self-pity in her tone, only a chilling, stark responsibility, a quiet resolve to correct the gravest error of her life. She opened a small, leather-bound satchel she had carried discreetly through the escape, a seemingly innocuous accessory that now held the ultimate key to global technological vulnerability. From it, she withdrew a stack of precisely printed schematics, tightly rolled and bound with a simple string, and a small encased data drive, its surface unmarked, but its contents brimming with decades of secrets. These were the encrypted digital files, the tangible manifestation of the Black Lotus project, the true terror she had helped to construct, the prize Silas Sterling had relentlessly pursued. Eleanor reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard surface of the data drive. Her historian's mind, trained to preserve and analyze, recoiled instinctively from the act of destruction. Yet she understood the profound necessity. This was not merely the loss of information. It was the cauterization of a wound, the severing of a tie to a past that threatened to consume their future. Her gaze met her mother's, and in Iris's eyes she saw not regret, but a fierce, unyielding determination to make amends, to ensure that her genius would never again be twisted for destruction. Leo, the architecture student, saw the precise lines of the schematics, the intricate complexity hinted at even in the rolled papers, and a shiver of both fear and intellectual awe coursed through him. He grasped the immense power contained within those documents, the terrifying potential for chaos, and understood, with a dawning clarity, that their destruction was not an act of surrender, but an act of profound, protective defiance. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible necessity, the immense sacrifice his grandmother was about to make. Finnegan, though he could not comprehend the intricacies of the Black Lotus project, understood the weight of Iris's conviction. He saw the genuine sorrow, the profound burden that shadowed her eyes, even as she prepared for this final redemptive act. He knew honor when he saw it, and this, he recognized, was an act of the highest honor, a willingness to erase one's greatest achievement for the greater good, to dismantle the very foundation of one's own power, to ensure peace. He took a step forward, his hand resting gently on Iris's shoulder, a gesture of silent support, of solidarity. He had faced his own demons, his own battles with conscience, and he recognized the courage it took to face the deepest, most personal ones. His gaze swept over his men, a silent command for them to stand witness, to understand the gravity of the moment, to acknowledge the extraordinary strength of the woman who stood before them. The quiet hum of their presence was a testament to their respect, their unspoken understanding of the profound weight of the choice that Iris was about to make. Iris then turned to the furnace. Its massive iron door, rusted but still formidable, stood ajar, revealing a glimpse of the cavernous, heat-scorched interior. She gripped the rolled schematics, their paper a palpable link to her past, and approached the opening. The heat, even from a distance, was a living presence, radiating a dry, purifying warmth. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a poignant pause, a silent farewell to the intellectual triumph that had become her greatest regret. This was not merely a destruction of documents. It was the incineration of a piece of her soul, the deliberate dismantling of her most intricate creation. Her fingers, those same fingers that had meticulously designed every circuit, every calculation, now released the rolled papers. They tumbled into the fiery maw, catching instantly, blossoming into a fleeting, incandescent dance of light and shadow, transforming from solid paper into ephemeral flame, then into delicate, dancing ash. The heat consumed them completely, leaving no trace, only the lingering scent of burnt paper mingling with the ancient odors of oil and metal. Next, with a deep, shuddering breath, she held out the small encased data drive. This was the core, the essence of Black Lotus, the digital heartbeat of a silent weapon. Its destruction was not just symbolic, it was absolute. With a final, sorrowful look, a silent acknowledgement of the power she had once wielded, she dropped it. The small drive, so insignificant in size, yet so potent in its content, hit the incandescent coals with a sharp crackle, its plastic casing melting instantly, its internal circuits sputtering and frying in a burst of tiny, brilliant sparks. The unique sound of digital information being violently erased, of a complex network of data being reduced to elemental chaos, was a chilling, almost reverent counterpoint to the roaring flames. The precious, poisonous knowledge, the comprehensive plans for global technological nullification, the very blueprint for a new kind of war, was annihilated, its existence wiped clean from the physical world. The heat devoured it, leaving nothing but a lingering trace of molten metal and a wisp of acrid smoke, dissolving into the ancient, purifying fire of the foundry. A profound stillness settled over the shipyard. The air, which had been thick with tension, now felt strangely light, purified. The task was done. The cycle, spanning half a century of secrets and pursuit, had finally closed. Iris felt an immense, overwhelming wave of both relief and a deep, inexpressible sorrow wash over her. It was the sorrow of letting go, of irrevocably severing herself from a defining chapter of her life, even one she despised. But more profoundly, it was the relief of a burden lifted, a penance finally fulfilled. Her shoulders, usually held with such rigid defiance, seemed to relax, a subtle but palpable easing of decades of tension. The lines on her face, though still etched with wisdom and experience, seemed to soften, her blue eyes reflecting the quiet, bruised hues of the rising sun, no longer distant, but gazing into a future now, finally, unburdened. The fire in the furnace continued its silent roar, a living, breathing entity, its incandescent glow a stark contrast to the encroaching light of dawn and a fitting testament to the secrets it had just consumed. Eleanor stepped forward, her hand reaching for her mother's, clutching it tightly. There were no words, none that could adequately express the magnitude of what she had just witnessed, the profound personal cost of her mother's actions, and the fierce protective love that had driven them. In that shared touch, a new understanding blossomed, a silent communion of lives irrevocably changed. Leo, too, approached, his initial fear replaced by a deep, almost reverent awe. He saw his grandmother not as a fragile, elderly woman, but as a giant, a figure of immense moral courage and strength, whose past, though terrifying, had culminated in an act of profound redemption. He understood now that true power lay not in creation, but in the wisdom to destroy what was dangerous, to unmake what threatened the very fabric of peace. The cold steel of the shipyard, bathed in the soft, nascent light of the new day, seemed to hold a different kind of warmth now, infused with the quiet courage of a family united, and the unspoken gratitude of men who had witnessed an impossible transformation. The secrets of the Cold War, once a haunting echo, were finally incinerated, transformed into harmless ash, leaving behind only the profound, lasting impact of Iris's ultimate sacrifice. Her long journey, a tapestry woven with genius, deceit, and profound regret, had found its conclusion in the purifying fire of the foundry, a silent, monumental act of atonement that promised a future free from its corrosive grip. The dawn broke fully, washing over the shipyard in hues of gold and amber, illuminating a world that, for the first time in half a century, was truly free from the silent, deadly threat of the Black Lotus. The air, once heavy with fear and despair, now carried the subtle scent of renewal.